In this video tutorial, we're going to take a look at 28 of the coolest and most amazing little features and tips and tricks in Photoshop that you may or may not know about. Some of them you may have seen me do videos on recently, but a bunch of them you probably haven't. This is 28 great features of Photoshop that you may not have known about. So in an article that I did a few months ago, I outlined 28 great features of Photoshop that I thought you should know. That's right. 28 great features, and that's because BuzzFeed doesn't do Photoshop, so I mean, someone has to. So 28 great features of Photoshop. Let's get started. Here, the first thing is going to be quickly whiten teeth. We're going to do this, and probably the simplest, most realistic way is not to just bleach teeth perfectly white, but rather to use a vibrance adjustment layer. I like to reduce the vibrance to about -60. I got -58, whatever. Select the mask, hit Command or Control I to flip and fill the mask with black. Then you grab the brush tool, and I like to set the opacity of the brush tool to about 50% or so. I'm painting with the color white, and I'm just going to paint over her teeth. I'm actually going to make my brush a little bit smaller there, and paint over the teeth. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to just neutralize enough of that color to give a nice, realistic white. See, there's before, there's after. Looks white, but not bleached white, and that's important. Now, this tip is something special. This is how to merge all of your existing layers to one new layer, just like that, okay? I feel like I write this hotkey, and it's a very long hotkey in almost every tutorial that I write. This is an important one. It's a long hotkey. Control-Shift-Alt and the letter E. So on the Mac, that would be Command-Shift-Option-E. You just have a layer selected, boom, you hit the hotkey, you save all of your layers, but you have everything merged to a nice new layer up here. The Rotate View tool is a very important tool and something that is extremely useful when you are retouching, and kind of all the time, but especially retouching and using the paintbrush tool. So if I'm painting, I find that if I draw strokes kind of straight across my screen, I'm a little bit more accurate with my brush tool. So let's say I need to follow her hairline. Well, if you hit the letter R, the hotkey is R, it brings you to what's called the Rotate View tool. And if your computer supports OpenGL or whatever the newest graphical card support system is for Photoshop at the time you're watching this tutorial, you can use this tool and rotate temporarily. This is only a temporary rotation. And then so as you switch to the brush tool, and I can paint right in here to get a nice accurate paint, and then hit the letter R again, rotate however I like her to be. And let's say I have her rotated to some crazy angle, 54 degrees, excuse me. I can just hit the Reset View button, boom. It brings her back just to the way it is supposed to be. The Rotate View tool, very, very useful. There's a really neat and really fast way to change layer opacity, and that's by just selecting the Move tool and hitting any number you want. Let's say I want this, I got this white band here, I want it to be semi-transparent. Let's say I want to make it 70% opacity. I hit the letter or the number 7, boom, 70% opacity. Let's say I want 75. In rapid succession, go 75, and bam, 75% opacity. So that's pretty cool. If you hold down Shift, as I just did, and hit a number, you can adjust the fill opacity. So Shift, and let's say the number 7, well, that brings us to 70% as you just saw, but the letter, or the number 0 takes it back to 100. And the same thing, if I'm not hitting Shift plus a number and hit the number 0, takes me back to 100% opacity. Quick side tip on this main tip, if you're using one of the brush tools, like the brush tool or the clone stamp or anything like that, you can hit one of the numbers and it's going to adjust the tool opacity and not the layer opacity. So if you want to adjust the layer opacity, it's important to just select the Move tool. It's just kind of like my go-to. I hit the letter V, which is the hotkey for the Move tool, and then boom, hit a number, and it changes the layer opacity, in this case down to 50%. That's how to quickly change layer opacity with numbers. One of the other really neat things you can do in Photoshop is quickly select another layer just by holding down your Alt or Option key and using the square brackets. So by hitting the left square bracket with the Alt key, you move down the Layers panel, and the right square bracket, you move up the Layers panel. In addition to being able to select layers, if you use instead the Command or Control key, you can actually move that layer. So if you hold Command down and hit the left bracket, you can actually move that layer downward, and the right bracket moves the layer upward. So I can move down, grab this color layer, and lift it up above my sharpening layer, or I can move it back down below, all just using hotkeys, never actually clicking anything in the Layers panel. Occasionally in Photoshop, you need to measure something based on either pixels or inches or something of that nature. You can quickly and easily change your unit of measure by going View, Rulers to show the rulers, and then just simply right-click on the rulers and change the unit of measure from pixels to, let's say, inches. This is also going to change the unit of measure, by the way, over here in like the Info panel when you drag out a selection. See, the width, 8.8 by 5.5. That's going to be inches. If I right-click on this and set it to pixels, now we see 1992 width by 1244 height in pixels. So being able to undo as much as we want is a really great thing. Sadly, we can't undo as much as we want, but there are ways, if you go Edit Preferences, let's go Edit Preferences General, that you can actually change the number of history steps which you can undo. So we're going to come over here to Performance, and you can see I have my history state set to 101, just because why not? But you can really increase this up or bump it down. The more history states you have, typically the slower Photoshop's going to run, the more resources it's going to require. So that's kind of why you might want to run maybe less history states versus more. But if you have a computer that is a beast, run as many history states as you like. It's really that easy. And oh, by the way, if you're on a Mac, you would go to the Photoshop menu, Photoshop, Preferences, boom. So there's a somewhat unknown and very underused feature of Photoshop. In fact, I've never even really used it before, but it's something I know about and it's kind of cool. It is the ability to stroke a path with a pattern. So here's how you do it. You create a path just like this, and then you would right-click on the path, and don't choose Stroke Path. Instead, choose Fill Path. Now, here in the Fill Path dialog, you're going to choose, from the Contents drop-down, you're going to choose Pattern, not any of the colors, but Pattern. And then it's important here, you want to check on Script. And the script you want to choose is Place Along Path. None of this other brick fill, whatever, cross weave nonsense. Place Along Path. Everything else can remain the way it is, and hit OK. What's going to happen is you're going to get a Place Along Path dialog box where you can change the scale of the pattern, make the pattern larger or smaller, spacing options, all kinds of stuff you can play with. Hit OK, and you're going to see it's going to place this funky looking pattern all along your path. Again, really not sure how you're going to use it, but something that's kind of cool, and there's got to be a really neat way to use it, and really cool stuff you can do with it. But just know that it's there. You can stroke a path with a pattern. In Photoshop, you can apply a mask that's already filled with black. So in this situation, you see we have two layers here. One that is kind of like a warmer, richer version of the photo. But let's say we only want to apply this here to the paper. Well, we can immediately hide everything by holding down our Alt or Option key and just selecting the new mask icon. Boom, gives us a mask already pre-filled with black. We can grab our brush tool and we can just paint in our effect over the paper or kind of wherever we want. Let's say you need to find the center point in your Photoshop document very quickly. Well, there's a very easy and very fast way to do this. You can come up here under View and choose New Guide Layout. I don't know if you've ever used that before. And just set up a guide that has a 2-column width, or I'm sorry, 2 columns and 2 rows. And you can see it runs a perfect guide right through the vertical and horizontal centers of your image. And blammo, there's the exact center of your image. One of the coolest tricks in Photoshop that I've ever personally witnessed when I actually learned it in a big group of people, is how to quickly change the color of an object in Photoshop. Now this works especially well on very specular items, stuff that's shiny like the side of this car, stuff that already has a little bit of color in it. If you have shiny and color already there, this effect is going to work beautifully. This couple, well, looks like they're having a boy, right? Because the car is nice and blue, but let's say they just found out that it's actually a girl. We can sample here, grab the pink on her dress, we have a new layer, and I can just paint the car pink. Look at how beautiful our new pink car looks, right? Well, I think you and I both know this looks pretty awful. Well, what we can do, once Photoshop finishes catching up painting, is we can just paint like that and then change the blend mode to color. And just like that, we have a beautiful pink car. So if you're using Photoshop and you don't use the Quick Mask Selection tool, I think you're really missing out. That is, if you're creating any kind of selections with any sort of regularity. Quick Mask is located right here. Now, before you start using it, quick thing that I think you should do, double click on the icon to bring up the Quick Mask options, and the default is color indicates masked areas. I think you should set it to color indicates selected areas, and here's why. All you have to do is click a single time on the Quick Mask icon to activate Quick Mask mode. Grab your brush tool. We're painting with the color black. Let's say we want to create a selection of this coffee mug, right? We can just paint over it really, really quickly. This is going to be a very, very sloppy selection, but you're going to get the point, right? Once I have this all painted in, now if I hit the letter Q, which takes me out of Quick Mask mode, and by the way, Q also puts you into Quick Mask mode. You know, before I get out of Quick Mask mode, see how I'm painting with the color black? If I hit the letter X and paint with white, I can like clean this selection up here because I'm actually going to paint away some of my Quick Mask selection right here in the handle, right? Clean up some of that junk. Make that a little bit nicer around the edges there. We're not going to be too perfect. Now, if I just hit the letter Q, it's going to load exactly where I painted as a selection. I can Command or Control J now, pop the coffee mug up onto its own layer. It's a crappy selection, granted, but it's a very rough selection. We did it in literally seconds. Quick Mask mode. Great to know how to use it, and great to be able to harness the power of it in your own photo editing and Photoshop use in general. So out of the roughly 10,000 different ways to create a black and white image in Photoshop, one of my favorite ways is right up here under Image Adjustments Channel Mixer. And actually you can make this even better if you use a Channel Mixer adjustment layer. But we go Channel Mixer and you can tick on Monochrome and it actually gives you a black and white. You can then play around with your color channels. Typically with a black and white, it's a good idea to try to keep your total number as close to 100% as possible. If you go too low, you're going to just start dropping tones. And if you go too high, you're just going to blow tones out. So let's just go with something that's a little bit more standard, something like that. Whoa, hello, we're way too high. Let's drop our blues way down here. Something like, yeah, something like that looks kind of good. Maybe it's a little bright. And just like that, we've created a black and white. It's just a different way to create a black and white. I think it's kind of interesting. It's a little bit different, and every way of creating a black and white in Photoshop is a little bit different. Gives you different contrast and different tone and detail and things like that. So the monochrome mode in the channel mixer, one cool way to create a black and white in Photoshop. There's a super easy and super quick hotkey to change the color of text and even change the color of fill color layers, and this even works for shapes. So like I draw out a shape like this, we can do the same thing with these kind of shapes. I'm not going to do that for this tutorial, but just know that this exact technique works there as well. Let's say we got relaxing day in bed written right up here. We've got our swatches panel. We want to change the color of that maybe to this really spring green color. I select that, set it as my foreground color, and hit Alt Backspace on the PC. That would be Option Delete on the Mac, and we can fill that layer, or that text in this case, with that color. We can also just select our solid color adjustment layer and apply it to that as well, just using the same hotkey, Alt Backspace. That would be Option Delete on the Mac. And we've totally changed the way this image looks, I think for the worse, so I'm actually going to undo that. But that's a really cool, very speedy hotkey that you can use to change the color of blocks of type without having to, highlight the whole thing and then change the color up here or whatever. Just set the color as set the color as your foreground color, and then use the Alt Backspace or Option Delete hotkey. When you've got some layer styles, or even just a single layer style applied to a layer that you're going to go and scale, so I'm going to hit Command or Control T to bring up Free Transform and maybe boost this, make it 150 pixels wider and or 150% more wide and 150% higher. I apply that. My layer styles have actually stayed the same as they were when they were much smaller. When the text was much smaller, I should say. So in addition to scaling the layer contents up, I need to scale the layer style up. And I do that by going Layer, Layer Style, Scale Effects. And because I know I've gone up 150%, sure enough, I'm going to scale my layer effects up 150% as well. Now, one other quick way to get around this, let's say you're not, scaling an exact 150%, you can actually just right-click on your type layer and convert it to a smart object. And when you do that and you scale it up, everything kind of remains the same, and you get nice, beautiful layer style effects just like that. When you're working with any kind of brush tool in Photoshop, here I might want to add even more dodging and burning to this guy. It's nice to be able to see the exact center of your brush tool. You can do that by going Edit Preferences and choose Cursors and check on Show Crosshair in Brush Tip. Hit OK, and you can see now with our brush tool, well, it's actually the dodge tool, I can now see exactly where the center of my brush is, so I can more precisely paint exactly where I need to paint when I am dodging and or burning this fella. One great feature that is universally useful in Photoshop is the Alt or Option key. Virtually anything in Photoshop that you touch with the Alt or Option key means you're going to duplicate it. Whether or not it's a layer, you just click and drag while holding the Alt or Option key, or even a layer in the Layers panel, I'm holding down the Alt or Option key, and you can see I've duplicated, and I actually have a third yellow box now. You can do that with multiple layers. Now I've got 2 additional yellow boxes. The Alt or Option key, use it to duplicate, well, anything. As you work through and build up layer after layer after layer in your file, sometimes you want to quickly go back and see what you started with so you can figure out, hey, have I made any progress or does this just look like crap? You can do this very easily in Photoshop by holding down the Alt or Option key and selecting any layer eyeball, and what it does is it shuts off all of the other layers except that layer. So you can see now it takes me back to the original image, which in this case I think actually looks better than all this junk we've added on top of it in Photoshop. So the Alt or Option key and click any eyeball. See, there now we just have our black and white adjustment layer on. Oh, and by the way, you get out of this mode by holding on the Alt or Option key and clicking on that layer eyeball one more time. In Photoshop, there's a hidden tool hiding out underneath the eyedropper tool, and it's the ruler tool, which you can use to straighten images. But before we get into this, the newer better way to do this is actually to grab the crop tool, hold down the Command or Control key, and you can see it switches to the ruler icon. You can draw a straight line across, well, something that should be straight in your image, and it's going to straighten it with the crop tool, and then you can hold down your Shift and Alt or Shift and Option keys and just crop the image in, commit the change, and you'll have a nice straightened image. Now, if you do want to do it the older way with the ruler tool, it basically works the same way. You just draw a line across something that should be straight and hit the Straighten Layer button up in the top bar. That's it. You can straighten images in seconds. A pretty cool image navigation function of Photoshop is what's called bird's eye view. This is when you're zoomed way in on an image and you want to get to another part of the image quickly. You can just hold down the letter H and click and drag and zoom in on literally any other part of the image that you like very, very quickly. Clipping masks are essential and really easy to use and really important stuff. And they're super easy to learn how to use. So here's what they are. Basically, I have some type, Zoo York, whoever used to do that, I don't remember. But Zoo York over a photo of New York. And we want to basically make the text of New York look like the inside of Grand Central Station. Well, you can do that by holding down the Alt or Option key, hovering between the Zoo York text layer and the photo of Grand Central Station, and clicking. You're now clipping the photo of Grand Central to Zoo York. But let's say the client says, no, we can't go with Zoo York because that's someone else's property. We need this to say New York. Well, check this out. You can just double click and edit Zoo to say New York. Maybe even make that type a little bit smaller. And you can see that all of it just edits because the image of Grand Central is simply clipped to our live layer of text. It's a clipping mask. Super easy to use and very, very powerful. A must-know feature in Photoshop. At this point, most of us have seen that VSCO style fade, that VSCO fade, the Instagram fade, whatever you want to call it. Here's how you can achieve something similar in Photoshop. We're going to go Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and choose Selective Color. In the Selective Color Adjustment layer, basically all we're going to do is go to our neutrals and decrease the blacks by maybe, I don't know, -15, -20, something like that. Start to fade out some of the highlight mid-tone parts of our image. And then also go to blacks, and again, drop the blacks about -20. And you can see it really gives that rich black fade. There's before, there's after. A nice Instagram VSCO style fade for your photos or images or graphics or whatever in Photoshop. Let's say you're creating a selection in Photoshop like this, and you drag it out and realize this is about the size you need, but it's not positioned correctly. Well, instead of just giving up and creating a new selection, before you let go and commit the selection, hold down the spacebar key, and you can move the selection around to get the perfect positioning on your selection. It's that easy. Maybe the fastest and easiest way to get a retro effect on your photo is to do this. Go down here and choose to add a solid color layer to your image. I'm going to go and add a bright blue. It's important. You want to add a bright blue. Set the blend mode to the layer, or the blend mode, of exclusion, and then reduce the opacity down to, I don't know, 25, 26, something like that. And you get kind of a pretty cool, pretty stereotypical looking retro faded style image. There's before, there's after. Takes seconds. If you do a lot of work with web graphics and UI in Photoshop, this is going to be a great tip for you. You can export multiple layers as separate files, all named whatever you have named your layers. Check this out. We've got tags, the radial progress bar, switches thing, and also some other miscellaneous stuff, buttons and whatnot. This is all from 365psd.com. Really great site, by the way, if you've never checked it out. What you can do is just select all the layers. Select the top layer, hold down the Shift button and select the lowest layer, right-click and choose Export As. And then an Export As dialog box is going to pop up where it's processing and doing all this stuff. But basically here in the Export As dialog box, when it finally appears. Here we go. You have all four layers, as you can see, lined up. We're exporting them as PNGs. It's not exporting a background. It's preserving the transparency, which is great. Obviously, you can export as JPEG, PNG8, GIF, SVG, anything like that. All of that is amazing. But it's also automatically trimming these images down, so it's just the asset that we need. This is a 166 by 212 image. This radial progress bar is just 108 pixels by 108 pixels. So Photoshop's really doing you a lot of favors. You can quickly export a big batch of graphics just by using the Export As command in Photoshop. One of the latest and greatest, well, maybe not greatest, but one of the latest new features in Photoshop is the ability to add multiple layer styles. You can double click on a layer kind of anywhere and bring up the layer style dialog, and the layer styles that have this additional plus next to them means you can add multiples of that layer style. Let's just play with stroke. It's kind of the easiest to see. Tick on to add a nice white stroke. We'll just add a 50% opacity, white stroke, 10 pixels. Let's add another stroke now. All right, so this stroke we're going to play around with. We're going to make it even bigger. We're going to make it maybe 20. We're going to make it the color red just so it sticks out. Opacity of 100%. And let's do another stroke here. This one we're going to make, bright green. We'll increase the size even more, something like that. And then commit OK. So there you go. You can do stroke, 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 stroke. 3 strokes, all stacked up, all in there, making these are trees text look positively horrendous. But you do have the ability to add multiple layer styles, and that's pretty cool. You just have to do it, and make it look half decent. That's all. So the last little tip in this video of tips is more of an Easter egg in Photoshop. You can go to the Edit Preferences interface. Now on the Mac, that would be Photoshop Preferences interface. And you can do something here when you're choosing a color theme by holding down Command or Control Shift Alt. So that'd be Control Shift Alt and click on the PC, or Command Shift Option click on the Mac, and you get little coffee mugs. Or if you do it again, you get slices of bread to determine the darkness or brightness of your Photoshop UI. I'm going to leave mine at what I like, and that's the not darkest, but not even medium gray setting. And that's it. 28 features and styles and just things you can do with Photoshop that I think are going to help you in Photoshop, that are maybe some hidden things that you can impress friends with, or just generally good tools to have in your toolbox, good paintbrushes to have in your paintbrush holder, if you will. So that's it for this one. Get it? Got it? Good. Nathaniel Dodson, tutvid.com, and I'll catch you in the next video. Hey, wait, stop. Before you click away from this video, I just want to remind you, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and hit that little like button. It helps this video go up. And going up is what I like. That's what we want to do. If you also have a couple more seconds, go ahead and leave a comment. That's cool too. That's it for this one. If you enjoyed this video, check out either of these 2 videos right here for more of the stuff that I do. This hand is weird. Right there. Thanks, guys.